Greetings, everyone. Today we are talking about constructivisms, which makes for a more exciting module because these are theories that people are usually very interested in incorporating into their philosophies of teaching and learning. So before we get started, I just want to acknowledge that there are a number of different constructivisms that you will come across when you're going through the literature. For example, there's radical constructivism, cognitive constructivism, situated constructivism, social constructivism, cultural constructivism, social culturalism, and critical constructivism. So there's a lot of different constructivisms that you may see out there in the literature. And today I'm just going to be discussing what's often called radical constructivism, which is a subject-centered way of understanding constructivism, as well as social constructivism. And much like how you can see a number of different constructivisms in the literature, there are a number of different theorists, and I've included a list of a variety of different names you may see. This list came from our reading by Davis and Sumera 2003, and I've also added a couple in italics on my own. But today we are going to be just focusing on the works of Jean Piaget and Lev Vygotsky. So like last week, I'm going to be breaking up this presentation into several shorter videos. But I will have one slide deck uploaded to Brightspace. And maybe we'll do a poll next week to see if you all like this approach or if you'd rather just have one longer video. I personally, as a learner, prefer to have multiple shorter videos because it's a little bit more manageable for me, but that's just my preferences as a learner. So in these videos, first, in this video, we're going to be talking about epistemology and the shift we're experiencing in this module towards coherence theories of learning. Then we're going to talk about constructivism, particularly radical constructivism associated with Jean Piaget. And then we're going to talk about social constructivism and Lev Vygotsky. And what do both of these theories mean for us as educators? At the end, we'll also talk a little bit about experiential learning and David Kolb. While it's not a constructivism itself, it is heavily influenced by constructivisms. And I think it's a theory that will be of interest to many of you. And this was also going to be part of my Adult Learning Theories Part 2 video that I couldn't make because I was sick, so I am slotting it in here because it fits beautifully within this module. And you'll notice as we go through the videos, it's the same reference list, so it is the reference list for the entire slide deck, not necessarily just that specific video. So with that, let's dive back into epistemology that underlies constructivisms. So in our last module on individual learning, we talked about the metaphysical branch, particularly episteme and rationalism and empiricism. I also have another video from EDU 5101 that talks more about gnosis, including religion and mysticism, which I'll link up here if you're interested. And for the next 3 modules, we're going to be climbing the physical branch. So for modules 3 and 4, we're looking at intersubjectivity, which I'll explain in a moment. And then in module 5, we're going to take a look at the interobjective branch. And if you remember from our last module on the metaphysical branch, we were talking about this idea of there being an ideal realm out there, and that there are these universal truths out there that are waiting to be discovered. But this week we are going to experience a paradigm shift. And we can see a big paradigm shift here with regards to education, knowing, knowledge, teaching, learning, as we go on to the physical branch of the epistemology tree. So the physical comes from the Greek physis, which is referring to growth and nurturing. And so within this understanding, the universe is seen as being very messy and constantly changing rather than being something that's finished and pre-planned, which is a big contrast to what we discussed on the metaphysical branch. So rather talking about discoverable truths that are out there for us to discover, knowledge and knowing is understood in terms of adaptations and temporarily viable constructions because things are constantly changing. So here it's about coherence rather than correspondence to some sort of objective truths. And our reading this week by Angus McMurtry, who is one of my PhD supervisors, this week contrasts correspondence and coherence theories of learning. So he describes correspondence-based conceptions of learning as being about learners acquiring correct representations and teaching being about transmitting these representations to our learners. Coherence theories of learning, however, look more at whether different perspectives are actually compatible. So within this perspective, saying that someone knows something is really about whether or not they can interact effectively with something, not that they have acquired these objective truths out there that they file away in their minds. So there is 2 parts to this. So there is internal coherence, which is about coherence between our beliefs. And think of this as being internal within your mind. And Angus gives the example that 2 plus 2 equals 4, and then 2 plus 2 equals 5 would not be internally coherent. Although I will say, as someone who's likely dyscalculic, I could easily believe that 2 plus 2 equals 4 and 2 plus 2 equals 5 because numbers don't mean much to me. And with internal coherence, it isn't about correspondence with an objective external world and like what's beyond our head. And so because of this, we can have very diverse and sometimes conflicting views because it's about what fits within our internal coherence. And then there is external coherence, so what we know needs to work within our contexts. And this isn't about acquiring objective truth once again. It means that we have adapted effectively to our current purposes and contexts. So for example, being able to get an A in a course would be an example of really good external coherence. And here are something that's really important to note as educators is that learning is dependent on, but not caused by our teaching. So as educators here, we are influencing our learners' understandings. And the fact that we're looking at coherence rather than correspondence theories of learning has implications for our teaching strategies and our assessment strategies. So a few questions for you to consider yourself. What might someone's teaching practice look like when they're informed by correspondence theories of learning? And what teaching and or assessment methods come to your mind when we're talking about this? Now, to bring things back to our epistemology tree with all this idea of correspondence theories in our mind, we're going to talk a little bit about intersubjectivity. So intersubjectivity is focused on humans, including the language and other symbols that we use, our culture, our personal identities. And on this branch, truth is no longer seen as something that's out there for us to discover. And the theorists here began to look more at how people are construing their own reality. And then intersubjectivity has two branches. There's structuralism and post-structuralism. And we're going to talk about post-structuralism in our next module, so don't worry about it for now. So with structuralism, when we're talking about this, we're talking about structuralism in a biological sense rather than being about buildings or architecture. And we won't go too much into structuralism here because we're focusing on constructivism specifically this week. But what I will say here is that structuralism looks at the meaningfulness of our language, our beliefs, our social systems. And structuralism is concerned with how learning and truth emerges from dynamic relational structures between people, words, ideas, and practices. And here, teaching is very much understood to be more about facilitating rather than instructing, as we discussed last week. Now, what's really important for our conversations this week is constructivism and social constructivism, which would be both leaves on this branch, if you will. And if you join me back here for part 2, we will start discussing constructivism.